maker Maribeth Diggle, who moved from the United States to Europe at the age of 18 to study languages and received her formal education in music, finishing with a master's degree in opera with cum laude. She has lived and studied in Italy, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Germany, and currently lives in Belgium. Her work has literally taken her around the world and continues to do so, having had performances in all of the Western EU states, as well as Azerbaijan, China, South Korea, Japan, South Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Israel, and recently Palestine. As part of her career, a large part of her career was in collaboration with the renowned contemporary Belgian dance company, Les Ballets de la Baie, which is C of the B. You'll explain that later. It was here that she learned how art can influence the world and the stage can be a political platform. Performing internationally helped her understand her privileged surroundings over a 20-year period in Europe. It became clear not only that these European opportunities were simply not offered in most other parts of the world, but also within her own industry. That most opportunities, as well as leadership positions and government subsidy, were not typically offered to other types of people other than white European males. A near decision to quit opera and singing altogether happened the same year as the Me Too movement, which gave her strength to openly question her place at work. And with the support of the ballet and the Flanders Opera, she has since started researching and performing new creations of her own, including Falling, Songs in the Dark, a modernized Lieder album of newly composed art songs which sprang from her frustration of being employed or not, according to her physicality. Yes. As well as a newly composed opera dealing with the inner psychology of opera's most popular female characters whose lives end in early death and the correlation with the treatment of women in the art world today. The opera will premiere in 2021 and the initiative has received support from the Belgian government. To her left is, of course, Midgette. Midgette is the classical music critic of the Washington Post, a former regular contributor of classical music and theater reviews to the New York Times. She's also written about music, visual arts, dance, theater, and film for the Wall Street Journal, Opera News, the Los Angeles Times, Town & Country, and many other publications. A graduate of Yale University, where she majored in classical civilizations. She began her journalism career during the 11 years she lived in Germany, where she edited a monthly magazine, worked as a translator, and wrote several travel guidebooks. She is co-author of The King and I, a candid and controversial book written with Luciano Pavarotti's former manager, Herbert Breslin, about his 36 years working with the temperamental tenor, and of My Nine Lives, the memoir of pianist Leon Fleischer. She's currently working on a historical novel about the women who built pianos for Beethoven. To her left is Nolle McMurty. Soprano Nolle McMurty is interested in the intersection of music and theater, particularly through Baroque repertoire, art song, new music, and cabaret. Opera credits include Lacking, Callisto and La Callisto, Drusilla and Leopold and Anzoni di Popea, Fairy and Fairy Queen, and Venus and Adonis. In 2018, Noelle covered the title role of
Christina Jaworska.
What she said in the premiere of Jay Hippie's Out of Darkness. To remain is the title.
Yeah, the darkness to remain. Yeah.
To remain with Peabody Chamber Opera. She has been a young artist at Songfest in LA and won Outstanding Performance Award for Art Song in the Metropolitan International Vocal Competition. An avid recitalist, Noelle engages with thematic programming to highlight feminist perspectives in song. Her original programs include Ophelia and her sisters, Femme en Fleur, and The Heavenly Banquet. With the Cantanti Project NYC, Noelle collaborated on The Little Ghost, Ophelia Transformed, and her story, focusing on women's perspective in song. She performed at the New Music on the Point Festival, premiering works by Sarah Grace Griggs and Aaron Waneski. For the 17-18 season, she performed with Now Hear This, the ensemble in works by Scotty Orway and Kate Soper, most notably at the Kennedy Center. She's co-creator of Queen of Hearts with comedian Emma Tattenbaum-Fine, a cabaret show about female perspectives on love, and she's also the curator for this year's in-series Women Composers Festival. To her left is stage director Corinne Hayes, who has recently created new productions of La Rondine and The Notes in Figaro for the Miami Classical Music Group Festival, Rigoletto for Mississippi Opera, and Cozy Confite for Winter Opera St. Louis. Broadway role praised Corinne's staging of Cozy. Corinne Hayes manages her plays wonderfully. Every move is natural. Stage pictures are well composed. The chorus is given lovely detail, and every instrumental passage is filled with meaningful physical action. All in all, a beautiful job by Ms. Hayes. The 2018-19 season included a company debut at Opera Philadelphia, where Corinne assisted Jay Sarah on Midgette. Later in 2018, Corinne returned to Washington National Opera for Francesca Zabella's production of The Lion and the Unicorn, and Mademoiselle. Amy. What does that reveal? Corinne serves on the faculty of the Miami Classical Music Festival, the Red River Lyric Opera. She staged the Note City Figaro in Miami and The Little Prince at Red River for the 2019 summer festivals. The upcoming season includes directing a new production of Little Women for Temple University and assisting E. Warren Weaver, Don Giovanni Washington National Opera, and Patricia Rosette, Susanna Opera Theater of St. Louis on the new productions of Timely Works. And finally, to her left, also familiar to our audience, this should be Jessica Krash. Jessica Krash is a native of Washington, D.C. and continues to find a good place to think, about worldview, music, and art. She was awarded the 2010 Grammy for Classical Composer, Washington Area Music Association's version of the Grammy. Her work has been presented in both traditional and experimental concerts and radio in the U.S., Europe, and Asia, including a work for dancers and saxophones on the Seymour Canal and Thunderstorm. Jessica has given a series of lectures at the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, the Library of Congress, and the NIH on topics of music and the brain, music history, and the insights we get from dangerous, banned, and provocative music. She has given several series of chamber music master classes at Stratford. Jessica's compositions have been commissioned by the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and the National Museum of Women in the Arts, the 21st Century Consort, and J.T. Martin, among others. She has received grants from Meet the Composer, the American Composers Forum, the Maryland State Arts Council, the Arts and Humanities Council of Montgomery County, and fellowships from the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts and the University of Maryland, among others. She's currently composing a Woodwood Quintet.
Just finished and recorded it.
Yeah, congratulations. She just finished composing a Woodwood Quintet and is composing a violin concerto and pieces for piano students. Please join me in welcoming our panel. I always start these panels the same way. Today I'm just going to say, because there's such a large panel, brief answers to the question of why X. So why opera, why music criticism, why classical music, why stage direction. So we can understand how you came to this bizarre role we do.
I didn't know. I still don't know. And I will always question this for the rest of my life. And I think we should all question opera for the rest of our lives.
I was going to say along the same lines, I ask myself all the time, how did I get into music criticism? It was not my intention at all. But I grew up surrounded by artists in my family, including an uncle who was an opera singer. I began writing when I lived in Germany. My first piece, my first feature article was about the female trombonist who was demoted from the Munich Philharmonic because she was told, we need a man for the job. She fought the Munich Philharmonic for 13 years and 3 rounds in court because they appealed every time she won. She was finally reinstated and then left and went off and taught at the Music Conservatory, so she really won. And then when I got back to the States, I became the first woman to write about classical music for the New York Times, which in the year 2001 seemed to me like not that big a deal, but it was a really big deal in New York. And it was shocking to me the degree to which having a woman write about classical music was eliciting these bizarre reactions. So I thought a lot in various ways about women's role in this field ever since. Still not quite sure how I got into classical music criticism, but here I am.
I guess I got into classical music and opera because I wanted to be a storyteller, and it was the merging of music and theater and poetry and texts of different kinds that really I just thought was really wonderful and profound and life-sustaining. But it wasn't until I had graduated from my master's and I was sort of pushed into, I moved to New York City and I started doing auditions like a lot of young graduates do for young artist programs and summer festivals, that I started realizing that the repertoire that I was singing and the package of my arias that I created, and even the song repertoire that I knew, none of it I really picked for myself, and I didn't believe in a lot of the things I was singing about. Specifically, the roles that I was being asked to sing or I was being told were sort of perfect for me, or you're this type of voice type, this is what you do, these are the stories you tell. And it started making me feel very unhappy, and I didn't know what to do about it. And so I actually turned to song repertoire and programming as a means of trying to become like a curator and a creator and have some agency. But I can't shake my love of classical music and opera, even though it's inherent with all of these issues that we're going to talk about today, because I do think at its core, the stories that are there and the ones that we can unearth through research and through performance and through panels like this, I think that's what it's all about. So,
That's okay. Can you guys hear me? Everybody can hear me? Okay. I also came to opera through storytelling, and I believe really, really deeply in the power of stories. And I think that we have the opportunity as storytellers to offer a chance to see the world through another perspective, through someone else's eyes. And we come away from that having gained what I think is in sometimes short supply these days, having gained empathy with the world around us and with an experience that we're not capable ourselves perhaps of having. And I think that when we tell honest and clear and true stories, we are offering those windows into those lives. And I think I spend all of my time trying to serve that idea. It seems to be, it does.
You're good.
I'm good, you can hear me. I'm thrilled to be on the panel with these people. How did I get into composing? I always wrote music since I was a little girl. It took me a very long time to take myself seriously for writing music. I think I was one of those people who would have really benefited from role models of female composers. And yet I kept writing even though they weren't. I didn't notice that all those historic composers I was playing in my piano lessons were men. I just didn't notice. So I wrote music and I played all the guys and loved their music. And I took composition lessons by college. I mean, I think as a kid, my piano teacher didn't know I wrote. I don't think my parents knew I was writing music. We didn't take it seriously. I think part of why no one took it seriously, including myself, had to do with modernism. But I think modernism was, for the most part, not for girls, and maybe not for women. I think, there's some women who did well with modernism in painting and in music, but for the most part, I think it was something, we could talk about. I think it was kind of anti-female or anti-women or anti-feminine. I'm not sure exactly which one. How to generalize that, but I think that was a problem for me. So I wrote music, but what I was writing wasn't like what people were playing in concerts. And it took me a long time just to get that out in public and say, yeah, actually I am a composer. And I think in some ways, I think we're still under a shadow of modernism, even though we're not writing like that anymore. I think it still affects us. And in some good ways, every time I show students modernist music and I get ready to say, look how awful this is, I kind of go, oh, I kind of like this piece. So there's stuff there that the modernists did for us, and they opened possibilities for us, but I think they created some long-lasting problems.
Maribeth, you're sitting next to me, but that's not the reason I want to start with you.
Okay.
But this whole thing is kind of because of you. You brought to me, you asked me to do an interview for you. Yeah, for your project. And what I knew is we were going to have a phone conversation about Puccini's women and the way he depicts women. And so I was all prepared to explain why I don't think Butterfly's a weak character, right? But when we spoke, your project was so much more forward-sided that it actually talked about how the fact that we repeat these deaths over and over and over again has played itself out in that in the opera industry we don't encourage the full creative participation of women, of singers even, but particularly of women. And we had a fascinating conversation about that, and that's the night I decided we had to do this. I wonder if you can talk about your project, for projects with Frederick's Opera, but also if you can talk about your own personal journey. Like, I'm not sure the two are divorceable.
No.
And it's a really fascinating story that I think I've become a better person knowing that you took that journey.
Wow. Okay, I had the good fortune, actually, I didn't know until very late that I would even start a master's in opera. It was at a very early age, I had interest in contemporary music. And in the contemporary music world, you are constantly trying to reinvent your voice together with composers. And this was such a huge pleasure for me. And there was a piece written for me, a solo opera called Cain, which is based on the text of Sarah Kane, which enabled me to get in touch with a dance company called me. It's the Ballet Contemporain de la Belgique. It's the contemporary dance company of Belgium. And this started a whole era of new dancers together with Fabrizio Cassol, jazz musician and composer. Our first collaboration together was Vespers. It's based on the Monteverdi Vespers, and it was together with contemporary dancers and singers and musicians, cornetti, gypsy, jazz, and saxophone and drums. And this piece was toured around Europe and the world. And our next piece was Pitié, which is based loosely on the Matthew Passion. And currently I am a musical dramaturg for our tour Requiem pour Elle, Requiem for Elle, but it's also in French, it's her, which is true, both. And we are doing this, I'm not singing in it, but it's a study on death rituals, taking the Mozart Requiem being performed by Congolese and South African musicians. So this was my education. Alongside the conservatory, I was touring these pieces, and I saw very quickly in the contemporary dance world that dancers had a different information at school, which was you will have to create at a certain point, and you will have to understand who you are on stage and what you want to say. And when this was asked of me, I hardly knew what to say, because these questions were not ever asked of me, or even that I should even think that I should not be a translator. And the translator is a very important job. I love to translate other people's ideas, but I realized after 6 years small career in Germany that this wasn't enough. And the German house system became very anonymous after the dance company, because I was auditioning for the same man again and again, the white European with male with glasses. And sorry, I love you too, but I just saw, you know, not just for me, but for my colleagues coming in from other countries, you know, how difficult it is to break the stereotype, and how what a pity it is to not discover these artists. They are artists, you know, they are not just singers, they are artists, but we were just treated like singers. So I left Germany and moved to Ghent, where the ballet is based. And I started to understand that my time in Germany has been a research. And the question is, why of the top 5 operas performed in Germany, maybe today, maybe a few years ago, 4 of the 5 operas, the women die. Does this then affect my chances of climbing the ladder within the opera community? Because I only know maybe 2 or 3 singers, even men, who actually graduate to higher positions within the opera house. Opera houses tend to hire, I don't know, musicologists or pianists, but never someone from within. So this was also a test to see if they would let me in as a woman and as a singer. And after a meeting with the opera days in Rotterdam, a very prominent and important contemporary music festival that happens every year, the dramaturg there said, yes, this is the year of the emancipation of singers. So we are experiencing now the realization that singers have control and can have control over pieces being made and what people see. So this is very exciting. So I'm making a piece about the women who died. And I'm taking, I believe I will take it to make sure that Mimi and her life before she met Puccini. So I believe it's important to dare to maybe make a new blend. I will have more things to say, but I will let my colleagues have a chance.
Can I just comment on that? Because what both of you in particular have said, I hear over and over from singers, which is that you become a cog in the system and you're bringing years of experience. You're the one on stage that's transforming the audience, and yet in the system, you're treated like a cog, particularly if you're a woman. And to harness some of that creative energy is a difficult thing to do, in particular the German system that you described, where the whole system needs these cogs, these wheels to keep the machinery turning. And the people that lead it, the coaches, rise to become the conductors, rise to become the music directors, and the singers remain sort of the servants. And you can see that across the board in the opera field. There are very few singers who ascend to these positions, and we are starting to recognize that. Now we're suddenly seeing singers become directors of the Ojai Festival and do independent creative work. But I want to relate that too to what you guys were saying about stories, because story is important. Across right now in our culture, storytelling is having a moment too. As journalists, we're always going to tell the story of what happened. That's what a review is the story of what happened on stage. But a problem with using story, which is in a way a metaphor for opera, because what we really wanted to do was just tell a story. We would sit here and tell you the story. You wouldn't need the music, you wouldn't need the voices. And all the parts of opera that got me hooked are these visceral parts. And the story is like a vessel for the meat to come through, which I know is what you guys are saying. I'm not contradicting anything you're saying. But it's a particular kind of story. And you see a lot of opera houses today say, okay, let's make a topical opera. We'll take this story about this topical political thing and make an opera out of it. Isn't that great? But opera stories are their own kind of story. And if you want to make a documentary, then you'll make a documentary film. And I think people are exploring kind of what that means. And the real thing about the stories in opera is that they're for these tremendous emotions. And one of the things that I think really works about the Butterfly here is that it gets at that. It keeps the emotions and it keeps the music, but it's able to divorce it from some of the more problematic elements of the story. That's my reaction. I just talked. We don't have to go in order.
I hope you'll share with us some of your thoughts about arts criticism and what it means to be a woman in your field. Because I feel it would be fascinating than that. And I think you're one of the few critics around that reminds us that art criticism is an art. And that there are people like Jerker Arshall and great thinkers that have Nietzsche even, who have sort of revealed us deeper things about being human through reviewing.
Well, maybe it comes back to the storytelling aspect of what we're all trying to do, is that you don't ever want to get into a template. You want to be telling a story. You want to figure out what the story is. On one evening, the story may be something completely different than another evening, even if it's both orchestra concerts. Maybe one night it's the conductor, one night it's the piece. But I also think it's really important that mean, the function of criticism is not for me to tell you what I think. It's to get everybody thinking and talking. Somebody described it to me before I came to the Post as creating a watering hole where everybody could gather. And people who write me to disagree with me, in a way, that's the point of my job, not to make people disagree with me, but to make people think and articulate for themselves, because that active engagement with art is what keeps art alive. And too often in our field, people get in this very passive, the audience is quiet, the audience is sitting in the dark, and the audience believes that they don't really quite understand it anyway, and they need people to interpret it for them. And that's just not true. You don't feel like that about movies. You go to the movies and you feel free to talk about it, but classical music, people feel like they need permission. And so I feel like my job is to break down that wall and give everybody permission to have a feeling. And if it becomes that I'm a lightning rod and that permission is to feel against me, that's great. Like, think about why you liked it or why I'm wrong. That's making you think, you know. So that's I think what the role of the critic should be.
One of the things you're most known for now is being an advocate for women composers, and not just forward for young women composers, but reminding us that there's a whole body of historic women composers that are ignored, and that there's a narrative. So last week we had the panel Embracing Opera, and we talked about the Opera American cover that says "Where are singers of color?" And we like to tell ourselves that produce opera, that there just aren't singers of color there.
There are singers of color.
And it's the same with women composers. We like to say they're just artworks by women composers, and the ones that there are sort of Clara Schumann is the lesser, Fanny Mendelssohn is the lesser. And I wonder if you could talk about the narrative.
We're all dealing in this field with years and years of tradition, encrusted tradition, that's taught all of us on this stage, I'm quite sure, that the canon is the greatest thing. And, you know, the canon happens to be made up of men. And especially becoming a critic, I mean, you're a young person and you kind of buy into that. Like, well, I better, you know, really know what's good. Incidentally, if you read a new novel and said to your friend, I read this new novel, and your friend said, well, it's not as good as Charles Dickens, that would seem ridiculous. And yet I hear that all the time. Like, oh, well, is this piece as good as Beethoven? Well, God forbid we should listen to anything other than masterpieces that we know by heart. Anyway, that I feel so strongly about that it took me right out of my train of thought. I could leave it there, in fact. But along the way, that's what my point was. Along the way, as I became more established in this field, I realized that I have this platform, and it's up to people like me to try to make the change. And it's up to people like me to put the spotlight on different things, and that the canon only exists insofar as it keeps being shored up by people like me. And let me add that the American critical field, historically, since its inception, has been very much the gatekeeper of pompous, unadventurous European status quo. And a wonderful book came out a couple of years ago about all of the symphonic composers in America who were trying to create indigenous music. It's been all the way along, and how the gatekeepers kept stomping it down, even though the audiences liked it. So insofar as a critic could be a gatekeeper, I'd like to open that gate and not close it. And putting the spotlight on composers of color, putting the spotlight on women composers, anything I can do to open that gate up. In the last couple of years, I've become a lot more aware of the importance of doing that.
But am I right in saying these women composers have been here all along?
I'm writing a book about the woman who built Beethoven's pianos. She was an incredibly successful female piano builder. There's a wonderful magazine that begins by saying, we're all used to reading what men tell us about things. It's time that we stood up and said, this magazine is here to let us say what we want. And that magazine was published in 1783, I think. I found it because it was the dates of the woman I'm writing about, and I'm sure she read it. Women have been here all along. It's the history books that have left them out, and there's so many wonderful discoveries to be made. And there are so many obstacles to it in terms of finding the music, renting the music. There are no recordings of it. You've got to sort of blunder through. What if you spend hundreds of dollars getting the score, you play it, and then you don't like it? Do you even know if you like it or not until you've tried it in front of an audience? You're not trained, as you say. People are not trained to be creative and to think for themselves. You're so used to being trained to play Chopin 1,000 times, and you know it's great, everybody knows it's great, that it's very, very scary, that tightrope walk, to try something new. and possibly fail. Maybe it's a really crappy piece that you spend all that time on, and you've got to go back to the drawing board, but that is what keeps art alive and interesting.
Does anyone in our audience know the composer Louise Salmon? Oh, good. TC's a smart town. She was, yeah, a major American composer who has an opera that I've been trying to sell to every major opera company able to do it, on the Alsace with a libretto by none other than Thornton Wilder. Premiered in Frankfurt, has never been performed in the United States. It's huge, it's not something any series can do or will do. And it occurs to me that that piece is, clearly has Wilder's name, but the narrative is that it was a flop at its premiere, so we shouldn't do it now. How many works by
Madam Butterfly too.
And I think she's just one of many, many examples of composers that don't get looked at because they aren't already famous, which is sort of weird circular reasoning. Corinne, I saw the 5 major companies in the UK had a brilliant idea, I'm sarcastically, a few years ago to do a Saturday morning, 3-hour, here's why opera matters for the young people on YouTube, which of course no one watched. And it started with all 5 male, right, heads of the company standing on the gilded stairs of Covent Garden, being interviewed, and at the end the interviewer asked them, I see you're all men, are there also women that work in offices? And I kid you not, they all laughed and said, yes, we have plenty of women working in our offices. You work at Washington National Opera along with having a career of your own, and it's really hard. One of the recent reviews called us a woke company, and I had to look that up, so I don't think that makes us very woke. But it's hard to try to be a woke company in a city with an opera company run by Jessica Krash, who's, as we talked about last week, is at the forefront of the diversity, inclusion, and also promoting women conductors and women knowledge, and who herself has had an incredible journey to become as important as she is. And I think our city congratulates itself for having had the seen that she was the visionary and belonged at another company. I wonder if you can talk about your experience as a woman conductor, working alongside mentors Francesca's of course quite valid, but people like I thought Sarah Caldwell, who is probably the most important intendant the United States has ever seen, brought Placido Domingo and Beverly Souls for their debut, and not in something like Rigoletto, but in Hippolyta Eurydice of Rameau, who was the first female conductor, as someone who conducts Anastasia, this is interesting, the first female conductor at the Metropolitan Opera, and also a major stage director. Discovered Peter Sellers, there would be no Peter Sellers without Sarah Caldwell. I mean, people like her, Beverly Sills, who went on, of course, to run a company that when it was run by men fell apart. Or Pamela Rosenberg, who ran the San Francisco Opera and was vilified, but gave the American premieres of the Grand Novel and San Francois of Assisi, and did the most interesting work that's probably been done in the country up to that point, and maybe since. Those are women that either get erased or vilified, and I wonder about your own journey being in a field that allows that to happen, that does that on a regular basis.
Well, it's a massive question. I've actually, in my personal experience, I've been quite lucky in so far as the blatant sort of misogyny that I have heard from people like Francesca or just worked with Nicole Pinol, some really wonderful, well-established, just force of vision artists that have changed the game, tell these just cringeworthy stories that I will not relate now. But I have actually had fairly good luck. More of, because I've come up in a company that is run by a woman and run by that particular woman, a lot of those barriers of entry she broke them and I don't have to. And that's true of a lot of the people that work at Washington National Opera. We have a lot of women integrated into the company and have for a long time. One of the most interesting things for me has been going afield. So at my job at WNO, it's not an issue. It's not a question. It is not something that we need to worry about because it has been worried about and we've decided it's not worth our time. Women belong there because they belong there because they can do what they need to do better than anyone else. Then occasionally I go and direct, for instance, Carmen at Shreveport Opera. And I go in and I have this thought for the habanera, and we build the habanera, and by the end of it, Carmen has this group of women that she's been giving these slices of orange to. It's nothing shocking. But she's left the men wanting. She has paid them no attention. And we're feeling pretty good about this. And this chorus at Shreveport Opera, who is, a volunteer chorus, and they're into it, and we're all having a really great time with this scene. And I get pulled aside by the artistic director, and he says to me, "I appreciate your feminist ideas, but..." And that's when I stopped listening. Unfortunately, the result of that conversation was the habanera needed to be down center. And I, as a young stage director, as an early career stage director, I lost that fight. And I will be quite honest with you, I didn't fight it. I had been, when we're trying to build careers in the arts, it feels like the dog that chases the car. Like, what is the dog going to do when the dog catches the car? And I caught the car. I was like, wow, I get to go in and mount this incredible piece with this group of really fantastic young singers and with a conductor that's been in the business a long time, and I'm so excited about it. I'm going to go in and I'm going to discover Carmen, and that's not what they hired me to do. They hired me to stage the Carmen that we have all seen and will all see for the rest of our days. And that was after having spent a few years working with WNO and seeing all of these people. I mean, ultimately, it's not about women. It's about, because it doesn't have to be anymore. All of a sudden, it was about women. It was about her. It was about Carmen, and it was about me, and it was about me coming in to do a very particular job, devoid of any sort of artistic impulse or storytelling that I uniquely could bring to that story. And this is actually a hard thing to say in public, because I didn't fight for myself, and I regret it. I do. But I learned in that moment that I was going to have to learn how to fight for myself. And I've spent the next, 5, 6, 7 years, however long it's been, trying to figure out how to do so. Did I answer your question?
Well, I'm going to take back my word. I have a second question for you. Which is that what I hear is that it's more than, at the Opera America last year, Donna Baum, who wrote the main albums and the director, there was a whole panel discussion on this issue, and she didn't say much, and at the end she just had the question, how do we get more women in creative positions of leadership? She just said, just hire more fucking women. But it's more than representation. I also wonder, I'm really curious about, for you as a woman, what it means to approach canonical works that are problematic in this way, and how you as a director work through that in a way that I and my colleagues don't have to, or should, but don't.
Well, it's interesting to sit up here with so many people that create something from nothing, because that's not what I do. And especially as an early career director, I'm often being asked to do a traditional Carmen or a traditional Così or a traditional Rigoletto, or all of these pieces that have so many problems just hard baked into them. So I don't have the freedom, I don't have, at this point in my career, to tear it apart and put it back together. Because that's not what they hired me to do. So I do need to go in and do my job. But what that does is it gives me the opportunity to, and I think this came up at the panel on the Race and Opera panel, to ask the piece again, why? So how do I approach Rigoletto as if I'd never seen it before? And how do I find agency that is clear and real and true in this piece, that what they have asked from me is to put everybody in pumpkin pants and make sure the soprano is in the right spot for the high note. And for me, it becomes a sort of a labor of love, but it also feeds my own integrity, because it's hard to say whether the audience will respect. It's not that they don't respond, I think that they do. I think they understand that there has been care taken in drawing these characters that have so long just been sacrificial lambs. But I have to play, at this point in my career, I have to play within the system. And so when I come to these pieces, I can, when I start my preparation, I can sort of chuck everything I know about these pieces and these characters just straight out the window. Ultimately, I have to frame them in such a way that is what the company has asked of me. So for instance, when I was directing the Legend, I did 2 back-to-back. Like I opened one and I went straight into the next. And for me, it's like Gilda discovering her own agency. Because this is something that she doesn't have at the beginning of the opera. She has no control over her world. So how do I, in tandem with Gilda, discover the power that she gains over the course of the opera? And this, of course, leads to staging ideas and leads to ways of framing the piece visually, but what it does for me, what it does for the cast, is gives us a way to create these characters with integrity, rather than building up to the moment of destruction, the moment of sacrifice, when everyone is just sort of waiting for that transcendental death, right? Especially Gilda. I mean, we watch her ascend into the heaven. I mean, we can hear it, we can feel it, but we needed to know who this person was and what all of this trauma brought out of her in order to have earned that payoff. And that's something that I spend an inordinate amount of my time doing, because I'm so frequently doing them within the sort of confines of what we would think of as traditional opera.
Can I throw in something there? Because if I knew this or not, nothing else. What you were talking about before, being a cog in the system, this ties into it. And one of my soapbox issues quickly is that we conflate the art with the institution. We think that the music we love is the same thing as the orchestra we love, the opera company we love, and they are in fact different things. And which a company, again, like the In-Series, I'm not being paid to plug this or anything, but the whole point of this is that you're finding art in it again. And the whole point of a company in Germany or in Shreveport that wants to put out a Carmen that's gonna sell tickets and make its patrons happy is to do, it's a kind of pageant. It's to present something that the audience all recognizes. I say it's opera product. And to discover the creative art in these works is not what these institutions are necessarily asking of us. And I think that's what you're saying too. And that's a real challenge to redefining the canon with regard to women, is that you have a system which is male dominated, and that's the system that produces opera in this country. And I'm increasingly in favor of just inventing new kinds of institutions to deal with this, because that's where exciting stuff happens, and we're seeing it all over the country. The industry in LA, the In-Series in Washington, and in New York, there's a whole bunch of small opera companies. And I think it's one of the only ways to keep the art really art. Nothing else from my agree. I'm assuming he's gonna ask you something.
Well, now, okay. I was told I speak too soon. Actually, Jessica, did you know all that? Jessica, you're here because opera's kind of new to you. And because of that, you're the first audience to hear this, because of that, I really hope we can convince you to write a premiere for the In-Series for our 40th anniversary. And we've been in discussions for a year now about that.
Don't tell press.
And I felt one of the best ways to maybe learn more about opera would be to be part of making. And I also felt the fact that you don't have a background in Puccini would make your version of Puccini personal and different. And I knew you'd be brave enough to do the crazy inside stuff. But one thing that struck me about what you said earlier is that you were always right. And it was a question I wanted to ask you, because I was also a composer, I'm a very good one, but that didn't stop me from the age of 5 being a composer. That was my identity. and I went to school for composition. I was always going to be a composer. And I noticed you didn't proclaim yourself as a composer in terms of education until your PhD, is that right? Am I right?
Yeah, I think I was 30 and I used to practice saying, I'm a composer, I'm a pianist and a composer. I finally get to like, I'm a composer and a pianist. Like, it's really hard to say I'm a composer because what I wrote sounded different than what was around me. You're 20 years younger than I am. You came up in a different time and what was being written as well, aside from the male female difference.
I think men are, we can see ourselves as composers in a way that, but I also wonder about the fact that you haven't done opera. How much, and maybe I'm completely wrong, that might be informed by the fact that opera, of course, needs the most support structure to be created. So I wonder if one of the reasons that opera hasn't been part of your catalog yet is because those opportunities aren't afforded. And I remember you almost surprised when we started talking about opera.
Yeah, very thrilled and surprised, yeah. I had written the 2 song cycles that our mutual friend Noelle had sung. Those must have felt somehow opera-like to you in some way.
Or anti-opera.
Anti-opera, yeah.
They're wonderful song cycles, both one in particular, at least some sense.
Yeah, we said, well, I don't know which one seems more feminist, but one of them we said, a friend of mine had translated the poetry of Sophia, who is the only poet from ancient Rome, the only woman whose work survived today. And she was, my friend Mary Maxwell, she wanted to see how does a poem become a song, and she wanted to hear Sophia's voice come back to life. So it was this really nice open-ended project she invited me to do, let's write songs. And so we said those poems.
And then the Cantigas, which is
and then Emily came to rehearse and she said, oh, these are like the Cantigas de Amigo of Martin Kodak's, which are a medieval song cycle. Also 7 songs like the way Mary and I arranged it. So Sulpicia, they're about a girl wandering around, a young woman wandering around on the beach, waiting for her man. And Emily said, Jessica, why don't you write piano parts for these? And these are medieval songs. So I had the greatest, a friend came over when I was immersed in this process of studying the medieval music, studying the traditional recordings of it. And he came and he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm writing medieval music. And he said, you're late. But I had the best time writing medieval music for the piano. It was just really fun, bucking and strumming and trying to make a modern setting for these old songs.
where can we come into dangerous music?
Oh, a lot of different ways. I think some of it is voice. Do people want to hear what women have to say? I think about chick flicks and how guys will watch chick flicks. They don't want to tell anybody they're watching the chick flicks. So I think there's some of that, like how do people, or in an airplane when the male pilot gets on and says we're flying at 30,000 feet. And it's always the man's voice, even when there's a woman pilot. So there's things in our society that expect to hear a male voice, and I just, it's scary, but wonderful to hear this story last year of that woman pilot when the engine blew off and knocked out the side of the plane, and she landed the plane, and people talked about how great it was to hear her voice saying, we're gonna land, I've got it, here we come, and this is gonna change the world. It didn't, but maybe a little bit, because they heard that in a woman's voice. Some of it's voice, and what do we hear? I think there's an interesting question about aesthetic and male aesthetic or female aesthetic, and I think, probably some women write in ways that are considered traditionally male and others of us don't. But I think, for me, I don't know if this answers your question, but something I've been thinking about there. As a kid, I liked patchwork. I was interested in patchwork quilts and these things that women would make little by little, and then they all hang together as a whole. And when I went to college, and I showed a piece to a composing teacher, and he said, "Wow, it's got too much material in it." And often people say my music had too much material in it. And we were supposed to write these neat things like Beethoven and Bach and Brahms, where you had 2 ideas and you grew the whole piece. The word was organic out of these 2 ideas, and I didn't see any reason why we couldn't have patchwork and lots of different ideas that went together. And then as I had children, I saw more that my life was full of digressions and interruptions, and why couldn't those be part of music? Why did I have to have this straight line through the piece? In fact, one of the early grants I applied for at Midgette, you could ask what were the comments on your application, and I got told, it lacks direction, but it was expressive. And I thought, well, why couldn't we say, it was really expressive and had this wonderful kind of aimless sense of direction? And I, told a friend who saw this as very gender. And also one of my early first performances was at a 21st century concert. A male composer came up to me afterwards and said, wow, I was really surprised to hear such aggressive music from a woman. So I think this is, what are women's voices and what are these forms? I think, women my age, I hope it's different for younger women, but women my age, many of us our lives did not take straight paths. Why should our music have to take a straight path? I can't digress and be a collection of a bunch of different things, so long as it works, which is a little bit ineffable.
So I'm hoping to transition from you to Noelle, and I'm going to take advantage of being almost 40 to do the tell us what's like to be a young person. But something I hear from you is that your music is particularly unique just because you had a different set of opportunities. And I think of someone like Kai Sayako, who never saw herself in opera composer, that just wasn't simple. But maybe The More You Want is an amazing piece because she was reinventing the form. Or Judy Weir, who writes Saga of King Harold, which in 12 minutes is one of the most brilliant representations of what an opera could be. Or people like Laurie Anderson or Paulina Rivera, that were sort of, because they had to create their own careers, there wasn't a career path for them to follow. It made their work actually more interesting. And Noelle, you came to me as a singer to coach, and you mentioned the work of Kate Soper, who I didn't know. And part of that may be just moving back to America, but part of that might be a bias that I'm just coming aware of. But when I heard Kate's music, it's like, I've never heard anything like it. And I'm very picky about composers. And it's such a unique voice, and part of that must be that she performs it herself. She's created the opportunity. And you live in a generation of people who are creating, not just women, but performers in general are creating their own opportunities. And people like Ben Morrison, who is changing American opera, and there's no one else is, because she started a company and had a vision. I wonder what it's like to be a singer in this new generation, where you are encouraged to create your own world. You're brave enough to. I really admire that. I tried to teach you to audition for an Alcina, and you said, no, I'm not interested in that. I want to do my own thing. I love that. And just what your journey is and how you see, because I know you have a particular way of seeing performance as a creative act and not really recreate that.
So I guess my first thoughts are being part of a generation where I do think, especially as a singer, that there is starting to be a lot more emphasis on being more than one thing. So being a singer, being a writer, being a researcher, an academic, being a director of your own work, other people's works, or a dramaturg. And with that, it's wonderful. But it's also terrifying too, right? Because you have to carve a path for yourself and find a way to I guess sort of embody those different labels and categories in a way that feels authentic to you. And it sometimes can be difficult to communicate that within the system that we have, that I think is very traditional and hidebound, in terms of some of these larger institutions that we're talking about. Because in those institutions, it's really important that you play a specific role. And if you don't, it sort of puts the whole thing out of whack, and there really is no space for you. And so I think one of the things that has really driven me to want to create my own work, my own programs, and then through that, collaborate with other people. And I guess we say invite them into my world of programming, and then they riff on that and they bring something themselves, and work with in New York, I'm on the board of a nonprofit that two of my friends from my master's started. The best friends were also singers. It's called Please Project. And the reason they started it is for the same reasons that we're talking about in this panel, that we graduated from our master's and we moved to New York City, and we were ready to have the career that had been described to us. Okay, like we gotta do the auditions, and we'll eventually get the Young Artist Program, and then we'll get a manager, and we'll be doing. And when we realized that not only did that not actually interest us in the way that we thought, it had just been sort of indoctrinated or told to us that you should want this. And sort of what happens when you realize, oh, I don't want this, actually. I want something else entirely, and now I'm gonna have to define that for myself. So I think that's very empowering, but also very terrifying. But back to the Please Project, we created it as a production platform for supporting artistic work by women, and that can manifest in a lot of different ways. And one of the things that they brought me on to do is basically curate programs. And this has been like the most incredible experience for me. One of the programs we just wrote a grant for is called, I'm going to forget the title of the program. It's called, okay, it's a concert. It's a music theater sort of concert that it's in celebration of the centennial of the 19th Amendment that's coming up in 2020. And we found these incredible suffrage plays, and they were written by Cecily Hamilton, who was an English suffragist. And they were written at a time when basically in England, in order to, really sell society on the idea that women should have equal civic participation, they would create these plays and they would act in them. And they were advancing not just the cause of suffrage, but many other things, like social issues in that. And so we've taken two of these plays, and we're going to adapt aspects of them and modernize them, and we're doing a sort of vaudevillian review, in which we also, I found at the Library of Congress, they have an incredible collection of suffrage songs that have all been digitized and are open to the public. And what you find in this music is incredible. You find songs in support of suffrage, you find anti-suffrage songs, and you get this incredible, portrait of what was going on in this moment and what both men and women were thinking about this really pivotal time in our history. So we're taking those, and we're also including what would be considered, classical pieces by Helen Hope Kirk and Ethel Smith, to create this sort of celebration and also problematizing the suffrage movement. Who got to tell the narrative of the suffrage movement was white women, and white women of a certain class. And so problematizing who gets to tell this narrative that we're both celebrating, and examining through music and theater. So I guess to answer your question, that's the sort of program that interests me, that I'm trying to do. That's my kind of answer in collaboration with these other singers and leaders that I know, for maybe what the future could be, one aspect of the future.
Can I just throw in that the idea of having to create your own form to do what you want is not even restricted to women, because if you think of maybe the greatest composers of the late 20th century in America, Philip Glass and Steve Reich, both had to form their own ensembles and perform in galleries and museums, and institutions are still having a hard time really embracing. I mean, now Philip Glass is 80 and you're starting to see his work in bigger institutions. It's taken a while, and he's one of the most celebrated composers on the planet, and still the institutions are close to him. So this is, again, a systemic problem, and I think it's particularly acute for women. And you see a lot of composers also like Missy Mazzoli, who have begun their own things because there was no door open to them, and then become, I think the path between forming your own thing and being embraced by the establishment is shorter now, because the establishment's beginning to wake up to the idea that, oh, we better do something about this.
Yeah, the establishment is now copying the.
Yeah, exactly.
They will. Now I want to open up to an open conversation. I had a few points that I would just really well just ignore, but I'll throw them out anyway in case they do spark some thoughts. I think a lot about how we can be better as a company, And I told Anne in an interview last year, or even more than a year ago, that I think I wanted to do a season all of women composers. And instead I'm doing a Women Composers Festival, which isn't the same thing, of course. And part of that is because I have to think about what titles to sell. So one thing I was hoping to talk about is how you all think we might change the narrative so that companies can feel that they're in a place to do that, and to do that safe. I think is the wrong word, but to do big, bold changes that how do we get audiences to show up for these things?
Yeah, safely means you're selling tickets, basically. You don't want to do something that nobody buys tickets for, and however progressive and wonderful it is, it's really scary to see the empty house out there.
And for one show, it's balanced against other shows.
Right.
But I'm very aware that when I look at my 5-year plan, great, we have a Women Composers Festival this year, but I don't have any works by women composers until Jessica's piece. And what does that mean? What am I saying? So that's one thing. I also wondered about how we as an industry can give larger structural support without losing the sort of creativity that women creators show that men who have had the opportunities to work in the industry, in the structure, don't have. So how do we still create the sort of stuff that Morrison is doing while giving those opportunities? And finally, how do we deal with canon? What do we do? I persist that having Carmen Filter say at the end that does not solve the problem. So what do we do with the fact that we have a canon which is misogynistic, but we don't want to lose entirely? I would say even canonical is something essential to that we work in solo periods of time. And I'm going to go soon.
Handing me the mic is always dangerous. Maybe somebody else should start this.
Already talked to you.
I have a lot to say, but do you have anything to say? Where to start? The canon is misogynistic, sure, you can rail against it. We don't have the same degree of trouble with this in spoken theater, because in spoken theater we have new work alongside old work. And it's much easier to deal with the issues in the canon and be more understanding about the fact these are products of different times. And as Tim said so well in his introductory essay to The Butterfly, Puccini didn't mean to be appropriated, we just are seeing it through a different lens now and understand these issues differently. If you have a healthier balance between new work and old work, then you can have more distance on it. The problem is the field has come to be defined by these works to the degree that I have a lot of readers who write me and believe that the whole function of an orchestra is to perform the great masterworks of the 18th and 19th century. That's what it's there for, and which is all fine, but it's not artistic at all. Everybody's afraid that classical music and opera are going to become museums, and I always say, look at what museums are doing right now. Museums are quite creative. They've opened up the different kinds of shows with interactive displays. You're looking at all different, museums are great. I wish classical music was like a museum. The idea that a museum is something old and dusty, actually that's what classical music is. So I don't have as much of a problem with the canon per se, it's just getting the new work to come into the canon. As for the fear of selling tickets, there's a part, somebody's going to have to take the leap. I wrote a piece a couple of years ago called The Trouble with Opera, and I said, you're reading all of these new season plans, and you'll see some new work amid all of the familiar names, and the newer the work, the more familiar the other names. And I said, it's kind of like a bakery where they have all white bread, and there's like one loaf of olive focaccia, and you're sort of like, whereas if you're in a bakery that has a wide display of different kinds of bread, it's much more appealing. You don't have as much resting either. If you don't happen to like olive focaccia, you're not stuck between that and white bread. And until we get seasons that are more reflective of an actual smorgasbord, you're going to have a problem with the new work, because I get put off as somebody who loves new work by the one new work this year is this. I think critics are much tougher on it because there's a lot riding on the shoulders of that poor new work that needs a little room and a little air to develop.
I want some confidence speaking about the industry itself, but I would like to speak, and I'm sorry really, because I'm very insecure about speaking in general, and I don't want to forget something, but I would like to speak to education, and I would like to speak on a musician level, and maybe I say some things that it's new for you as a non-singer to understand what it is that we have to deal with. I read an article in the Deutschland Kultur in 2018. The title of the piece was called "The Bigger the House, the More Men." And this is the trouble in Europe. I also, my point of view is Europe because this is my education and my background. It would be so interesting to compare it to the United States. And the first section says, men stage the pieces, women sit in the audience. The German Cultural Council study from 2 years ago states that 4 out of 5 directors of theater are men. 4 out of 5 pieces in big stages are staged by men. 3/4 of all plays were written by men, and women make up 3/4 of the public, and in small cities it's even more. And because it is the Cultural Council, they don't differentiate, it's across the board, museums, journalism, visual art, media, filmmakers, producers, editors-in-chief, etc. I think when we leave school, and in general, we are just faced with structures created by men and kind of boys' clubs, let's say, which is very hard to, not just to enter, but to understand that you can enter it. It sounds a bit weak of me to say that, but it took a long time for me to even understand that I had a place at the table. We are also faced, women are faced with more age limits, especially in competitions. I think today it's either 30 or 32, and men have at least until 32 or 34. This makes it very difficult for more dramatic voice types to achieve a career, especially if you want to have kids earlier. I had a very interesting interview with the very first equal rights officer in Germany. She created her own position in the Braunschweig Oberhaus. Her name is Sonja Palasch. It's the very first equal rights counselor in Germany of 100 houses. She writes in an article, once we have a job, we are in danger to have to deal with the possible abuses that come with it, especially from our superiors, because it can lead to losing your job. We have to deal with the decades of public and private body shaming or overexposure of our bodies. Yes, compared to our male counterparts, although I have to say I have a lot of male colleagues who have been judged in Hollywood too, especially if they are of color. We have to deal with equal payment for work. We also have to deal with work. We have to actually work with men in crisis, which means actually the director and that sort of autocratic position that they are in, they are all stressed out, like, and we have to follow them around and say yes. Otherwise, we really do fear losing our jobs. While many of the roles that we play as women are women in crisis. So, what sort of seems ironic to me, by the way, I think one solution could be to write more pieces of mad scenes for men. There seem to be thousands for women, and I can count on one hand for men. Women's confidence seems to be questioned sort of across the board, that if they can fill the position of fill men's positions within the industry itself, they're expected to do the same job as their predecessors have, without sort of changing the status quo too much, and their fingers start to get pointed if they're not doing exactly the same thing.
Baby oranges and karma.
Yeah, exactly.
Flirt with women.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna finish. I wanted to offer some solutions. I think we're at an age where women don't have to die on stage in order to be a heroine. I'm wondering why, these are also questions I ask openly. I don't know the answers to all of them, but why do women have to be man-haters in order to ask for accountability and respect on stage? What is the definition of opera, and who deserves to call their pieces after working with Africans and with Chinese and with Middle Eastern artists? I'm wondering if the Opera House can also be a multicultural platform. The definition of opera is to tell a story where the music leads. And I've been to cultures where this is definitely the case, but I'm not sure they would be invited or welcome in an opera house because it's a different culture. But, one misunderstanding that we start to have about change usually states that people making steps to update opera is that they want to take away our Puccini and our Verdi. And I think you were saying this before. I understand the frustration also because I think one solution that they've tried many times in Europe, a very good colleague of mine calls it the tit flashing technique, where they try to update opera by putting more naked people on stage or women, or unnecessary violence or rape, and etc. And I think this is just a step to pass to get to something deeper, and we have to also allow this to breathe, as you were really rightly saying. Romeo Castellucci did something very interesting in Romeo Opera House in Brussels. He took the Mozart's magic flute, and he called it magic flute. Some say he should have said he based it on magic flute, but the second half was an interview because you have to pass through some magical steps like fire and whatever. Was an interview with burn victims and how they became burned, and the blind people and how they became blind. And they were telling the stories in between, in place of the spoken passage, in between Mozart. And I have to say, the room was silent in the town, thousands of people sitting there. Yes, etc. I think we also have to re-examine what we do at the conservatory, how we educate. This is also our fault, how we educate singers, what are we asking from them. I had maybe one improvisation class. There is such a thing as classical improvisation. The rest I found on my own because I was asked to do this. I think this is incorrect. I think singers should collaborate more with instrumentalists to create pieces. I think we should be asked to stage pieces, and we should be asked to explore our voices on a non-classical level as well as a classical level. If you want to be a stage animal, you have to discover all the sides of your voice and become an artist, as I was saying before. The last example I want to give is at the Flanders Opera. I believe also the future of opera is collaboration and not just the one on top and the rest listening. They did a version of the Picture of the Barrel last season in 2018, and this was by FC Bergman, and this is a collaboration of 6 young actors. They staged it together, and it was amazing. It was brilliant, and they are very famous now all together. Voila. I think these are the chances that we have, and the things we should explore also from within education and from within the opera house, from the artists' side.
I have a thought that I wanted to share based on what you were saying about education, because I couldn't agree more. And one of the things, I just started my doctorate, and one of the things that I would really like to try and explore and create is the idea of a class that could be taught in a conservatory, university, college setting, that basically helps performers and also composers or directors to create like a programming methodology. Like, what does it actually mean to tell a story? Like, what sort of questions should we be asking? And we've been already talking about this on the panel, and when you have the agency and the curatorial authority to make these choices, like, what are you going to say? So I would love to, I'm not quite sure what that would look like. I have a lot of ideas. And so it's what I'd like to use my time in my doctorate doing. But also, I think some of these changes also start with the individual, right? The like age-old adage, it starts with me. And one of the things that has really just completely opened up my life as a performer and a creator is I made a deal with myself a couple of years ago that when it was my main responsibility to program a concert or a piece, that I would try to have 75%, I qualified it with a number, of works on the program written by women. And just doing that alone is the easiest thing in the world to do. As we all talked about here. It's just incredible work by both historic and living female composers to choose from. So it's not hard, it just takes a little extra effort because in our institutions, in the way that we learn about music, specifically as performers, we're not really taught how to research and analyze. Sometimes you're not even really taught how to translate your own texts and come up with your own kind of poetic translation of what something could mean. And so I really think that starting with the individual, like making a pledge in the way that we're going to collaborate with other people and our own work, also in trying to create some sort of programming methodology that could help include underrepresented groups and individuals that have been marginalized and erased in the canon. But also, I had one last comment, which was, I do think that maybe there are some aspects of the canon and some of these canonical works that I personally don't mind putting aside for a good long while. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it might be a very necessary thing. Also, in order to create space for more new works. And also, I think we have to wonder what some of these canonical characters, like what we're actually seeking from them. Like, what do we want them to teach us and tell us? And my best example of this is the character of Ophelia, which I was personally obsessed with. I was really obsessed with with Hamlet, and I was really obsessed with Ophelia's end, which I think as a culture we are, because there's these endless interpretations or reinterpretations, deconstructions of Ophelia. And I was one of those people who really wanted to deconstruct Ophelia and give her a different end. And it's a popular thing to do. And so I engaged in my own programs of doing that, and then I also collaborated with other women to do that. And then it sort of struck me when I was in New York doing a concert with Contented Project. But it was a bunch of really talented, brilliant women in a room singing this Berlioz setting of Ophelia's drowning together. And it felt very sort of ritualistic and unnerving. And I suddenly felt like really uncomfortable. And I was like, and I thought to myself, why do I need Ophelia to be resurrected so badly when in fact Shakespeare gave her end? And it was maybe sort of a, I don't know if it's a or whatever, but that, why did I need to take this character that has become sort of the epitome of lack of agency, lack of empowerment, being a pawn in the lives of her father and Hamlet, and why did I need to rewrite her story so badly? And in spending all this time trying to rewrite her story that had already been written, maybe I was missing out on other stories that would be more inspiring and relevant to me now. Maybe not. I think that's a very personal thing. And so I came down and decided that I need to put Ophelia away for a bit. And maybe I'll go back to her, because I do love her so much. But, you know, yeah, those are just some thoughts.
This, do you want that?
We'll try this one. I find as I'm listening to all of you, I'm thinking about the canon of men and the things you're saying about the canon and some of the real emotions in doing a traditional work. And I until these two song cycles and talking with you about the opera, and I have a chorus piece, a couple of newer chorus pieces, but a lot of the work I like involved with this instrumental music. I think we take the men of the canon too seriously. I grew up with that Harold Schoenberg Lives as a great composers, and all the composers were middle-aged and white. And, I was 16, these stodgy guys started getting younger than I am. But I don't, when I'm teaching piano, I find a number of the women students, they won't really play the Beethoven sforzandos loud enough. And I'm like, oh, go for it. It's not us. It doesn't feel like us. It's really this granite, aggressive thing. Try it, see what happens. Try it that way. And I think, Beethoven was 14 and he was 17, and I grew up with this, Beethoven's rolling his grave, hearing your mistakes in his sonata, and I don't think we have to see them that way. And I know when I was writing the Martin Kodak songs, I pictured, like, if he was sitting there with me, Jessica, why aren't you using the pedal? As a piano or Bach, if Bach was sitting next to us practicing some of his pieces, do something with the high notes, I had this little keyboard, these were creative people. They probably would have sat there next to, I said to my students, well, do some different note that sounds more interesting than one of the great, classic action figure composers wrote. And we said, well, if Chopin was sitting here, he might say, oh, cool, try it that way. And I don't play my own music the same every day. I don't think the composers the historic ones would have done that. And I think we treat them as so kind of condemning of us if we get their work wrong. But why are we so sure? So I think that's another, maybe a way to loosen some of this stuff, is just not to take them as such superhero. I mean, they're geniuses, yes, but they weren't beyond human. They're like us.
And as for being sure, there are different performance traditions with every generation anyway. And what you're bringing up about education, both of you, it's the role of conservatories has become to teach people how to do these canonical roles in such a way that you will get hired to sing the canonical roles in the institution that wants you to do in this way. And it becomes conserved, exactly. And it becomes very, very difficult to change because the people who have the real power in the conservatories are not the innovative entrepreneurial people, though they're there, but the teachers who are generally older and have a lot of power. Everybody comes to the conservatory to work with them so they can learn those 10 orchestral excerpts or 5 arias for your portfolio or whatever. And that, the other point I want to make that dovetails with that is the tremendous fear of change. This idea that don't take art Puccini. Like, if you do something with it, if you do a Regie Theatre production, if you do something experimental, you're somehow ruining my love of this composer. Where the great thing about these works, God knows they've already endured for centuries. They're going to endure bad productions, they endure bad performances. We've all heard them. There's nothing to be so afraid of. But what you were saying about the way things need to change, one of the reasons people resist change is that if we start opening up the repertoire to women and people of color, you're going to get very different looking audiences and different looking institutions. And the people who are deeply invested in these institutions don't really want to see that. They really want younger people who are in exactly the mold of the older people. And that's not going to happen. So the choice is really to let the institutions die out because we can't carbon copy people from 30 years ago, or to find ways to let them grow organically, or third choice, to remake them, but to leave them alone.
And this is so different from the other types of art. I mean, you go to a dance performance and you've got people with pink hair. I mean, I don't care what they're wearing, but it's, you have people from all backgrounds. I mean, the theater world is one of the things that
Absolutely.
I don't understand fully, and I don't agree that we are not somehow making it to get everyone in the opera house.
Absolutely. And opera is inherently more appealing to young audiences in that, first of all, it's telling a story. The stories are all about love and sadness and screaming at the top of your lungs. I mean, I fell madly in love with opera at the age of 17, having been exposed to it all my life, but it's particularly appealing to teenagers. All the heroines are adolescent. That's why they're all mad scenes, you know? And we've encased it in this idea that it's this very high art, very serious. And a lot of the work we loved was kind of popular art and looked down on and sort of trashy. And it was the Hollywood movies of its day. Puccini was very much the Hollywood movie of his day. There were no films. And to admit that it's popular and populist is to reanimate it, not to denigrate it. And I get so many people who are like, how can you say that Puccini is really popular? It's not really popular. It's good to be popular. Yeah. But that's a slight digression from women. But it's just that fear of admitting anything new into our hermeneutically sealed tank is killing our field.
I had an experience a couple of summers ago for the most part, as a keeper of the canon. I have not had a lot of opportunities to work on new pieces. And I think it was last summer, I directed 4 short operas for the Fringe Festival. And I had all but one of the composers and librettists in the room with me during the staging process. And there was a moment that I discovered that I could look at the composer and ask him why there were 2 bars here, or why the tonality had changed, or what the purpose of this fermata was in his head. And we could build these things together. And coming up through a fairly conservative training system, certainly, a conservatory system, the idea that I could ask those questions at all and not just pour sweat over why there's 12 bars in that Ariadne duet with Zervinetto and the composer that doesn't go anywhere. It's beautiful music. And somehow I had failed Strauss. We had this conversation this spring. Because I couldn't crack it. And all of a sudden I had this composer sitting across from me and I'm like, hey, let us figure this out together. And all of a sudden, you're talking about curatorial agency. And I know this isn't exactly the same thing that you're talking about, but the idea of curating within the canon, I think, is really invigorating, but also being able to have these conversations in such a way that we, as collaborators, because if there's any art that is no, that's not what I'm going to say, is collaboratively driven. It's not elegant, but you know what I mean. It's this one, because y'all are better at what you do than I would ever be at what you do, and that's why we can boost each other. That's how we build these things even more strongly. But the idea that I could ask Puccini a question was a revelation for me, and the curatorial agency of that, and to just agitate these pieces in a new way and not feel like we're worshiping, what did you call them, the superhero, the action figure, worshiping at their 6-inch tall feet. It was pretty revolutionary for me. And it sounds like such a small thing, but it changed the way I think I'm going to do it.
Similarly, when we talk about piano lessons, I read something recently about a pianist who was saying for young female students, all particularly like the work of Bartok. And it turned out they thought it was Bella Bartok, which was the only girl.
I thought Frances she was a woman when I was a kid.
Meredith Wilson. Until 2 years ago.
Mary Beth, when we come back to you, when we talked a lot about the way singers are trained. It's also strange to me that this phenomenon of coaching, that sort of actually very singers want to think that they have a coach that gives them all their ideas. And I found myself, as we were talking, thinking, well, this is a female male thing, this is a singer thing. We don't encourage singers to be creatively empowered. As I was sitting there, I started to think, how many intendants, stage directors, people in creative power in the opera industry were singers first. I'm always surprised when people I am as an intendant, oh, I was a singer. And they're all men, but not all men, but most of them. And how many women directors have I myself and other people said, oh, they're just a singer trying to be a director. And yet, I'm not looking at snake good for you, but And yet, we have no problem giving Costa Rica a conductor baton over and over and over and over again.
What do you mean, we? Who
Who
is we here? I wouldn't give him a baton if my life, in fact, he's called me out in the national press for my resistance to his baton wielding, so.
And we all know this, his skill as a conductor, but he sells tickets, so we keep giving him that, and worse, we keep giving him jobs where he has power over people who are vulnerable. And this is in the opera industry, and we're just beginning to deal with it. There is a huge culture of domination of the vulnerable, and it's not just against women, it's also the Mortuaries, which are Corinne Hayes, legion of the gay mafia, and I myself have been in a number of positions where there was predatory conduct. None of this is by women. If there's one reason to shake things up, it should be that the opera industry is like, and from James Levine to Stephen Ward, it's on every level of the opera industry, this problem. And I don't think we cracked the surface of it, and I don't know of a single instance of a space being made unsafe by women in positions of leadership.
I actually, unfortunately, in the course of researching a Me Too story that ran last year, I talked to more than 75 victims of various forms of harassment. I didn't hear many people who've been harassed by women, but a few. Board members preying on handsome young conductors was the most common way that happened. But yeah, it's always about power, and it's always about people who don't quite see themselves as having power, so they're bolstering themselves by preying on younger people, and often people who have issues of power in other realms as well. But that's a terrible note to be drawing on.
It struck me out there that, and I'm included in this sort of "you're just a singer" thing, is something you uniquely go towards women and not towards men.
Well, I think male singers are some of the worst Me Too predators because they're made to feel so powerless. I've seen male singers over and over, even quite renowned ones, in positions of Metropolitan Opera. I had a friend who was singing there, who was a well-known singer, who was in a head-butting thing with the conductor that was tearing him apart, and he was very well-known. And so I've heard a lot of stories of male singers who were predators, and another female singer said to me that her theory had always been that they were made to feel so emasculated that this was a way of asserting that. Of course, there are many different flavors of Me Too and many different men, but I think male singers also suffer under this "I'm just a cog in the system" syndrome, because there are so very few singers in positions of any kind of power. But I mean, now you're seeing people like Barbara Hannigan, goodness, the name escapes me, that amazing, the African-American woman. Claire McFadden, but Julia Bullock, thank you. I was gonna say one of my favorite singers, but people who are really creating careers for themselves and programming. Julia Bullock does a wonderful job of programming programs of female composers and different kinds of music and making it into a narrative that's incredibly personal, and it's really compelling. And so it's happening.
I thought of her when we had the Singers of Color conversation.
Right.
I thought they're just not not at the Met, and more power to them.
There used to be singer of color at the Met. I know this is not a color discussion, but there was a period after Leontine Price, Grace Brumpher, Shirley Barrett, that seemed like women of color were doing pretty well, men of color not so well. And now, oddly enough, you're seeing more men of color who are established in the field and fewer women of color, and women of color are feeling more obstacles. And I don't understand quite how that pendulum has swung, but another issue that bisects the gender and race divide. And I think there are female singers of color who have a lot to say about this.
But Julie's a great example of doing more interesting work than
She's amazing.
what's being done in the houses.
But I mean, it sounds like you are also working in this mold of like going out there and trying to become agents. There's a company called the New Victory Opera in Virginia, which is all singers, sort of mid-career singers in their 40s, who were so sick of being cogs in various European wheels that they made their own company, run by two women who were very proud of being women, who first really made me aware of how few women and how few singers are in these positions. by becoming music directors themselves.
I do want to open up for a few questions. I meant to say this last week, but it sort of ties together gender and race. The Seattle Opera put out a Facebook video, it's been maybe 3 or 4 years now, of a magic flute. And it was the scene going between the slaves and into the armed men, the ministers, that's the rest of it. And it was a video about how wonderful their stage crew are and how fast they can do a costume change. And they painted the slaves, which are Moors in the original, blue, and they did a 2-minute costume change resulting into the armed men. And they're going from the most misogynistic scene the most racist scene in maybe the whole operatic play to the most misogynistic scene in the whole thing. But the conversation we're having is about how fast they can change their costume. In our attempt to be woke, as a company, we're trying to do more of that, but I want to also encourage our audiences to hold us and other companies accountable. And when you see that, that's wrong. It's not all right in opera to let things we wouldn't let go in theater or politics. And it seems a lot of what we do in opera is say, well, it's that. And that deadens our art form. And I believe a shared responsibility between audiences and the companies, because the company belongs to you, actually. Do you have any questions? I can't see anything.
I got one.
Not that you need this, but.
Thanks, yeah, I'm loud. I've probably gotten about 30 or 40 people to come to see the show here in the last 2 weeks. And everyone has come to me and said, oh my God, it's the best thing. It's the best thing. Now that's great. But what do you do with the other people? Yesterday, I went to 2 of my dearest friends who are fanatical about opera. And I said, you gotta get your asses over to the Insulas next weekend. If you can do anything to get here, get here. Just please do me the favor. And they've come here before, over the years, and enjoyed. Oh no, I'm not going to see Butterfly. She doesn't die. They already know that, and that's like, they're not going if it's not Butterfly. So what do we do, or you, or all of us, to talk to these people, to get them off their asses, to see something different, so that the companies that are out there are not catering to them over and over and over and over.
I was going to tell Anne this privately, but I believe in full transparency. So having thought I couldn't do a season of women composers because I need to do things that will sell, Butterfly, as proud as I am of the artistic product, has been the hardest thing to sell in the last season. So maybe the thinking is wrong, that Butterfly wouldn't actually sell.
I've gotten the letters too from people who say, well, you can't do Butterfly without the race. And it's like, well, actually, go check it out. Maybe you can. But, oh no, I know better. That's part of what we're talking about, the fear of somebody, especially Butterfly, which is like this sacred object. But one of the problems, and I've certainly learned this as a critic, is you can't control what your audience thinks.
Right.
You know, and I'll write a piece and I'll get a letter saying, your review was the greatest review I've ever read, you were fabulous. And the next email is, you are the biggest idiot God ever created, and how dare you judge. And you know, all you can do is put it out there as a critic, as an artist, and you know that you're not gonna reach everybody, and you also can't predict what's gonna catch fire and what's not. Or, you know, what's going to develop word of mouth. Sometimes word of mouth takes longer to develop too, I think. I know that Washington National Opera was complaining for Appomattox that it only had about 8 days to run, and the word of mouth was people after 2 or 3 weeks were saying, oh gosh, I wish I had been able to see that.
Twice or 3 times.
Right, or even once, that they didn't, you know, didn't really go, and then they kept hearing about it later. But all you can do is, I mean, I think communicating genuine enthusiasm to people generally sparks a response, you know. And if only to make your friends think about it enough that they come to the next one, you know, that they maybe open their minds. But fanatics are very hard to.
But I'm a fanatic too, but the point is, your head is so closed, and this is a gay couple. And I'm like, how can you be gay and say you're open to things if you won't even let yourself go to see a performance that's a little different. It's just, I wanted to pull out a gun and kill him.
That
I would have been an opera, right?
Yes.
I would also like to mention something I forgot. It's, I think this opera house is affordable.
Right.
And so,
It's more than I'd like it to
yeah.
be. I wouldn't pay this much to come see it. I wouldn't.
Okay, but if I understood well, and this is the same in Europe, but at least in Europe, there was the Dutch National Opera did a sort of revamp of their communications a few years back, and they, the commercial read, opera tickets are the same price now as cinema tickets. They had a sections, it's not in the front row, but at least students could come to the shows. I understand that opera can be expensive. If you want good seats, I heard today from my host, who is lovely, said $300. Who can pay it? I cannot pay this. And I'm in the industry. So I don't know, I think it's also a money question. We're still here.
But there are ways around that. It's not the end of the world, and there are places you can sit in, companies that have different programs. So it's not the end. You can't get.
I understand you can maybe get in, but can you enjoy it? I mean, can you?
I think so.
I hope so.
I was a student and I began by standing at the Metropolitan
Of
Opera all the
course.
way in the back, and then
Me too, but
make
that's
your way down.
That's a very
Find an empty seat.
It's true. It's true that because we both already loved music.
Yes.
And I do know, I got a note from a woman whose daughter had written a letter. It was an orchestra ticket. She had 2 tickets to hear the National Symphony Orchestra with John Andrea Noceda, their new conductor. And she wrote to all her friends and said, he's youngish, 50-something is young for a conductor. And he's dynamic, and he's turning the orchestra around, and it's a really fun program. And she listed all the reasons she liked it. The girl was in her early 30s. And, who will go with me? And the mother wrote and said not one of her friends took the free ticket, and which is kind of heartbreaking. It's a very high bar. The gravitational pull of this field over people really under 50 is not as high as it used to be. And that's part of the reason. My counterexample, which is again not opera, not even women, but important, is that the Park Avenue Armory did this show with Igor Levit, the pianist, doing the Goldberg Variations with Marina Abramovich, the visual artist, and she staged it, and he came out and played the Goldbergs, and it was in the dark, and then it was lighting, and whatever, and he played the whole piece. He didn't jazz it up, it was absolute pure music. And there it is. And it was sold out. Totally sold out. People sat in silence. They leave their cell phones at the door and they heard it. Then Igor Levit comes back to give a concert a couple years later, and they sold 92%. But the point is, he had sold 7,000 tickets to hear the Goldberg in absolute silence, no coughing, nothing. But the regular recital still wasn't that appealing. So to me, that says people actually want to hear this, and people are willing to hear the Goldbergs and listen. But the format is a challenge too. And we need to keep finding ways to sort of broaden the format and make it sexy and make it more of an artistic happening and make it more artistic, because it's artsiness that's drawing people to the Goldberg rather than Marina Abramovich.
Out of the box.
Excuse me?
Out of the box.
Out of the box, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and I would say the other night at our box office, we had a young man, sort of exactly what every opera house wants to have in their audience. Someone who's young and has disposable income, presumably lives in the neighborhood. So for us, the targeted audience came in, asked how much the tickets were, so he wanted to come, he heard about it, and scoffed at $41. And I said, like, $46. I think some of the responsibility has to lie on foundations, because I would say this, but what would happen if if a foundation gave us enough money to do a whole season without tickets, the way a lot of art galleries now? How does that change us as an organization if we don't have to think about selling things, and we don't have to think about making things for a certain audience that looks a certain way, is a certain age, has a certain income, but we can go do an opera in Nicosia, and that doesn't have to be a sidebar, that could be our central program. I would personally, of course, love to see foundations take an approach that's a little less rigid in their funding and a little more just here's money. Do the shows the way you want to do them artistically, and don't worry about how you sell them for a while, and sort of reshape the image of opera first, and then figure out how to make a new funding system. But right now we're dealing with the fact that opera has for 200 years, so if you're not white enough, you're not rich enough, you're not male enough, and the people we want who need to come to the opera now aren't going to do it. If we make it really expensive, and $46 is nothing compared to.
When you get two
Yeah,
tickets
right.
for that at this show.
Yeah. That would give a free.
Can you do like 10 tickets per show that are $10? Just to have, I know the Shed in New York was doing a thing where they always have like 1 or 2 rows, whatever they do, reserved for the $10 seats.
Well, so an example is that we approached a local foundation about being able to offer subsidized tickets to all of our shows for members of a certain community. And their response, which is responsible, is we don't do subsidized tickets, that's not something we fund. They'll fund research projects, they'll fund things that are quantifiable, that are quantitative, but they won't fund the sort of things that actually get new people that have never been the opera in trying. I think if people come see Butterfly, they're gonna see that it's not what they think opera is. But are they gonna spend $46 on an unknown thing? I don't know.
Even that, I think I told you, I've been stopping people on the street, no, that's not true. I got in a conversation with people on the street, people helping me with the bus or whatever, and I always offer them a ticket to the opera here, I would have bought it myself, and they always, I say, I'm the person